Mom, hey, Mom. Wake up. I was suddenly shaken awake, and as my eyes fluttered open, I saw my daughter, Margaret's anxious face coming into focus. I slowly sat up and asked her, "What's wrong? Did you have a bad dream?" "No, Mom, please. We need to get away from Dad right now. Hurry!" "What?" That one word jolted me awake instantly. I was stunned by the shocking things that Margaret was saying next. "My name is Nicole. I'm an ordinary 35-year-old working mom, raising my 7-year-old daughter. Margaret is bright, innocent, and very adorable. She's our treasure, but she's a bit unusual. Or rather, she has some mysterious traits." "Mom, you forgot your umbrella." "What?" That day's weather forecast was sunny with occasional clouds. The sky was mostly cloudy, but there were patches of clear sky. I was about to leave the house before Margaret stopped me. "It's okay. There's only a 10% chance of rain today." "Mom, you'll get soaked. I saw it in a dream. Take the umbrella, please." Margaret handed it to me, and reluctantly, I took it with me to work. "No way!" Just before heading home, I was caught in a sudden downpour. I was shocked as I used the umbrella to keep dry on my way back. When I got home, I saw Margaret's wet umbrella in the stand. "Welcome home, Mom. I told you so." She greeted me proudly as I walked in. Margaret had been predicting the weather accurately since she was very young. She would also guess our dinner menu correctly. While it wasn't quite foresight, she did have a strange ability. Because of this, she sometimes felt out of place when playing with friends, but she didn't seem to mind at all. More importantly, we, her family, accepted it as part of her unique personality. Aside from that, she was an entirely normal, adorable girl. What concerned me more was my husband, Robert, who was the same age as me. I met Robert through a marriage agency. At the time, I was a career-focused woman. I was successful, but had no real experience with relationships, and my worried parents insisted I join a marriage agency. I might be biased, but Robert was even more handsome back then. Plus, he was a feminist, and I fell in love with him instantly. Thanks to the fact that we were both considering marriage from the start, things progressed quickly, and here we are now. This year marks the 10th year of our marriage. Lately, Robert has been coming home very late, usually not returning until morning. Even though Margaret has grown, she's still only 7 years old. Balancing taking care of Margaret, house chores, and my job without any help from Robert has been honestly challenging. When I asked him why, "These days, everything costs money. We need to save as much as we can for Margaret's future. You never know what might happen, so I'm working hard for her," he said. Hearing it was for Margaret's sake, I couldn't argue, and I kept juggling my work, house chores, and childcare. One day, Robert came home unusually early, and he looked extremely tense. I quickly sent Margaret away from the scene and asked him, "What's wrong? Did something happen?" "I actually want to quit my job." "What?" It was completely unexpected. After Margaret went to bed, I listened to him again, and it turned out that he was having trouble with his work relationships and couldn't find any fulfillment in his job, making it unbearable for him to go to work. "Please, I can't take it anymore. Once things settle down, I'll find another job right away, and I'll handle all the housework until then." I didn't want him to quit. But if he kept pushing himself and ended up breaking down, it would be even worse. "All right." Reluctantly, I agreed to Robert's request. Soon, I started working more seriously, and Robert became a house husband. However, his way of doing house chores was much rougher compared to when I was handling them. I was particularly concerned about the meals. I would come home after 9 p.m., after Margaret had gone to bed, and eat Robert's cooking. It often consisted of fried foods with incredibly heavy seasoning, making me need a lot of water. The first time I ate it, I couldn't help but question him.
What is this? Are you giving the same food to Margaret?
No. I make sure to season her food lightly and serve proper portions. I thought you'd want something more flavorful since you're tired.
Too much fried food. Not enough vegetables. I'd be fine with a lighter seasoning meant for Margaret. Please pay more attention to the balance.
No matter how many times I said it, the seasoning and menu hardly changed. When I tried to leave food uneaten, he'd say, "I'll eat it with Margaret tomorrow." No way. I'd rather eat it myself than let Margaret have it. Whenever I reluctantly finished my meal, Robert started serving dessert afterward as an apology. He also began making snacks and drinks for me every night, saying it was to help me unwind after dinner. I wasn't much of a drinker before, nor did I usually eat sweets late at night, but I didn't want to waste Robert's kindness. Although I had mixed feelings, I appreciated his efforts in cooking for me, and he was still doing his best as a house husband. Not having to do any housework made things easier, so I decided to endure it. 6 months after I started working as the main breadwinner, I finally had a day off with no plans. However, I felt unwell from the morning and ended up lying down. Lately, I've been feeling lethargic and having headaches even without a fever. I would fall asleep right after eating. Maybe I had been overworking myself. Luckily, Robert took Margaret to the nearby shopping mall, and I had told them to contact me if anything happened. I appreciated Robert's kindness for taking them out so I could rest. Thinking about how grateful I was about to fall asleep again. I'm back. The sound of the front door opening and Robert's voice woke me up. It was already evening. Apparently, I had been sleeping since late morning without having eaten anything properly.
Welcome back. I'm sorry I couldn't join you. Did you have fun?
I asked Margaret, who was holding a palm-sized character mascot they probably bought there. She nodded quietly, her eyes downcast. I found her unusual behavior strange. What's wrong? Did something happen? She might be tired from walking around all day. Take a shower and rest early. Robert gently placed his hand on Margaret's shoulder, and she nodded slightly before going up to her room. After making sure Margaret was out of sight, I softly asked Robert, "Hey, she seemed a bit off. Did you scold her harshly?" "No, I didn't do anything. She's just tired, I think. Anyway, about dinner." I was perplexed by Robert's words. As much as I hated to admit it, I didn't want to eat his cooking anymore.
Dinner, right. Let me cook tonight. I had a whole day to rest, so I feel energized.
Oh. All right. Then I'll take care of the drinks and snacks. I also bought dessert as usual. Robert lifted a bag, and the logo of a well-known cream puff shop was visible through it. Tonight, I'll make a low-calorie, nutritious meal. After that, the three of us had dinner together. I took a shower with Margaret and decided to sleep with her after a long time. Margaret seemed anxious, even though she smiled when we were alone, and I wanted to spend as much time with her as possible. Mom, in the bedroom with just the two of us. Margaret whispered so softly I almost missed it, wrapped in her blanket.
What is it?
Please, don't drink tonight.
Huh?
Was this another one of her little premonitions? I nodded in response to Margaret's serious eyes, and she closed her eyes in relief. I got into bed before Robert could prepare the drinks and decided to sleep early. Robert wouldn't wake me up just to drink, would he? If he called out to me, I'd just pretend to be asleep. With that in mind, I closed my eyes.
Mom, hey, Mom. Wake up.
Suddenly, I was shaken awake and groggily opened my eyes. I had really fallen asleep, and in the hazy vision, I saw Margaret's tense face. Wondering what was going on, I checked the clock on the bedside table. It was 2 a.m. I realized that Robert, who should have been sleeping next to me, wasn't there. Was he in the bathroom? I slowly sat up and asked Margaret.
What's wrong? Did you have a bad dream? No, Mom, please. We have to run away from Dad right now. Hurry! What?
That one word snapped my drowsy mind into full alertness. What did she just say? Still shaken, I whispered to Margaret.
Why? Why are you saying that? This is our chance while Dad isn't here. Because if we don't, you'll be made sick or have an accident.
What is she talking about? Margaret's shocking statement left me stunned. Tears welled up in Margaret's eyes, unable to hold back any longer. As I cradled her on my lap and gently patted her trembling back, she began to calm down and slowly started to speak. According to Margaret, when she returned from the restroom at the shopping mall, she found Robert talking on the phone. Since she was always taught not to interrupt when someone was on the phone, she quietly approached him.
Dad was saying that soon she would be gone. He was planning to make it look like an accident or illness. Then, once the insurance money came in, he could be with that person.
She recounted. Who was he talking to? I asked.
I don't know. At first, I thought it was you, Mom. But it wasn't, because Dad was bad-mouthing you to the person and then said, I love you.
If this was true, Robert was planning to kill me. And was involved with another woman. Margaret continued, sobbing.
He said, I love you to someone who wasn't you, Mom. I was so shocked that I called out to him. Then he immediately hung up and asked how long I had been there. I said just now, and he smiled and said, it's a secret from Mom. If you don't tell her, you'll get a cute and nice mom.
Margaret, her eyes and nose red, clung to me.
But I don't want a cute and nice mom. I love my mom, so...
Margaret broke down, clinging to me, wailing. At that moment, tears streamed down my face, both from the guilt of having put Margaret through this and the anger towards Robert. Margaret, trying to protect me against her father's words, must have been so scared and needed so much courage. I carried Margaret down to the front door. When I saw that Robert's favorite shoes were missing, I instantly believed Margaret, and any remaining trust in Robert vanished. According to Margaret, this wasn't the first time Robert had gone out in the middle of the night. She had seen him leave the house multiple times when she got up to use the bathroom. How had I never noticed before? Even if I was a deep sleeper, if Margaret, who rarely got up at night, had seen him several times, it must have been frequent. Margaret gripped my sleeve tightly. Right. This wasn't the time for doubts. I had to respond to Margaret's feelings. Because I had not drunk any alcohol, my mind and eyes were clearer than usual. Looking directly into Margaret's eyes, I asked,
Margaret, if we run away from Dad now, we might never see him again. Are you still willing to come with me?
Yes, I'm scared of Dad. I want to stay with you, Mom. I want to be with you forever. All right. I made up my mind. Luckily, it was summer vacation for Margaret. I told her to pack what she needed, and I quickly gathered our belongings as well. When I checked the drawer where I kept valuables, I was stunned. I opened other drawers that I rarely used and found the same situation. Feeling both disappointed and angry, I decided that getting out of the house was the priority. We hurriedly left before dawn and decided to stay at my parents' house. My parents were shocked to see us arriving so early in the morning, but once I showed them the various things I had found just before leaving the house and explained what Margaret had told me, they accepted us with gentle understanding. After the sun had fully risen, I sent a message to Robert. My mother got injured. I'm going back home with Margaret to help her for about a month. Please take care of the house while we're gone.
Got it. Leave everything here to me.
Despite losing both his daughter and wife overnight, his response was surprisingly indifferent. He was probably secretly pleased, thinking he could enjoy his freedom. While I'll stay quiet for now, I won't let this slide. For Margaret's sake, too. Upon reaching my parents' house, Margaret fell asleep with tear-streaked cheeks. As I watched her sleeping face, I made a phone call. A month later, after taking refuge at my parents' house, I decided to return home, leaving Margaret in my mother's care. With my smartphone in my chest pocket, I unlocked the door and stepped into the living room. Robert, who was holding his head in his hands in front of his smartphone, looked up and smiled as if nothing had happened when he saw me.
Welcome back. You shouldn't come back so suddenly. It's a surprise. How about I make you an iced café au lait with lots of milk and sugar?
In the past, I might have been placated, but not today.
No, thanks. Instead, I want you to sign this.
I handed him the divorce papers as he was heading to the kitchen. Robert sighed deeply when he saw the divorce papers.
Divorce, huh? But if it's your wish, I'll go along with it.
His reaction was predictable, yet it irritated me. With an unaffected demeanor and a smile, he continued.
I'll agree to the divorce, but since it's coming from you, you'll respect my wishes for the distribution of property, right?
What are you talking about?
You'll be the one paying.
I replied.
What?
Robert looked stunned. Feigning a smile, he began to object.
I've supported you in my own way. You can't just unilaterally hand me divorce papers like this to a good husband.
A good husband? One who quits his job, cheats, and tries to put his wife in danger?
What?
His dumbfounded expression made me laugh despite myself. I pulled out a small bottle of pills from a rarely used drawer and showed it to him. The label read, 1 pill for a full night's sleep for stubborn insomnia.
I bought those because I couldn't sleep,
he said.
From the look of it, you haven't used them since I left.
I emptied the contents and took a photo of it before leaving. Shall I compare the two?
Don't say nonsense. Anyway, do you have proof that I gave those to you? I know all about your exchanges with your lover. What?
I returned to my seat with the small bottle in hand, pulled an envelope out of my bag, and emptied its contents onto the table. Robert froze, his expression one of sheer disbelief. Naturally. It was a collection of printed and enlarged screenshots from the messaging app he used to communicate with his lover.
I want to skip work just to see you. Wait for me. I quit my job, so now we can talk even more. I love you. I got something good. With this, she won't wake up. I can come see you. We'll be together soon. Just wait a little longer, my princess.
These messages detailed everything, from his fake excuses about overtime to his elaborate plans to make my death look like an accident or illness. Now that I think about it, the meals Robert had been preparing for me were high in salt, fat, and sugar, followed by high-sugar desserts. No wonder my health deteriorated. And he must have been tampering with my drinks while I was in the shower. I hadn't noticed because I rarely drink, but when I had the same drink at my parents' house, the difference in taste was startling, and I knew for sure.
I started feeling unusually sluggish around the time I began eating your meals.
Despite falling asleep quickly, I never felt rested. It makes sense now, alcohol and this drug together. It's a dangerous combination. The effects could be disastrous. Robert's face turned pale as he tried to come up with an excuse.
Anyway, why do you have all this? Did you snoop on my smartphone? That's an invasion of privacy.
No, I didn't. Your lover gave them to me.
What?
I emptied the contents of a second envelope, and Robert's face went even whiter. Understandably so. The scattered photos showed him being intimate with a young woman. Immediately after returning to my parents' house and believing Margaret's words, I had contacted a private investigator to monitor Robert's activities. He had no idea I was suspicious. Within 3 days of us leaving, Robert had brought his lover into our home and was living a newlywed life. It was easy to uncover her identity, including her real name and workplace. A few days ago, I had someone negotiate with your lover. When she saw the photos and I proposed that she testify and provide evidence in our favor in exchange for a reduced compensation, she handed over her smartphone and said I could do whatever I wanted. Robert looked back and forth between the smartphone and the photos, muttering things like, "So that's why," and "she betrayed me." I placed my finger on the divorce papers lying on the table. Now, here's the main point. With all this evidence, I could go to the police, but I don't want Margaret's biological father to become a criminal. So, what? Sign the divorce papers. And, of course, you'll be paying alimony, compensation, child support. Oh, and the money you squandered from our savings on your affair partner too, right?
Wait! It was just a fling. Divorce, that's too much.
Whether it was a fling or not doesn't matter. You betrayed your family. You terrified Margaret. You tried to kill me. Expecting to be forgiven after all that is too convenient. As I said this, Robert collapsed to his knees. Then, suddenly, he grabbed my leg, glaring at me with intense eyes.
It's your fault for being such an unlovable woman. Do you really think I'll just let you walk away?
Robert raised his fist. I met his glare, pulled out my smartphone, and thrust it in front of him. I've been connected on the phone since I walked in.
What?
Robert's fist stopped mid-air. As his grip loosened, I quickly stood up and gathered the documents I had brought.
The person on the other end is my father and our lawyer. They're waiting around the corner, ready to come in any time.
No, this can't be. I've been recording everything, so I'll use it as evidence. From now on, we'll speak through our lawyer. Leaving the speechless Robert behind, I took my belongings and left our house. I got into the car where the lawyer and my father were waiting, sighed, and called my mother, who was looking after Margaret. Margaret answered the phone with an energetic voice. Mom. Is the talk with Dad over? Yes. Margaret, I'm sorry. I talked to him, but we can't live with Dad anymore. There was silence on the other end. Guilt for taking Margaret's father away from her hit me hard. I thought I had steeled myself. I'm sorry, Margaret, It's okay, Mom. I understand. I'll be here with you from now on. Margaret's gentle words brought tears to my eyes. My father, sitting next to me, put a comforting hand on my shoulder. After that, we got divorced. The apartment we lived in was sold as part of the property division, and I moved back in with my parents. As for Robert, unemployed and unable to afford a lawyer, he turned to his parents for help after failing to pay the agreed amount. His parents were furious. The amount we claimed from Robert was paid in full by his parents as an apology to us. Robert then tried to lean on his affair partner, but she quickly discarded him. Unable to find decent employment, he now scrapes by with part-time jobs from dawn to dusk, as I've heard from his parents. On the other hand, I started a new life with my parents and Margaret. Margaret stopped saying strange things and made friends at her new school. She seems to enjoy each day. Various challenges may await us in the future. But I am determined to raise Margaret to be happy and well-adjusted.
Why? Why does Betty have to go through this alone? If this is what life had in store for her, it would have been better if she was never born.
My mom, Gianna, crumpled to the floor beside me, screaming. Betty. My beloved only daughter. Just as my mom said, what purpose did Betty have for coming into this world? For such a short life filled with so much suffering. Where is God in all this? Or is this supposed to be some kind of test from above? Even though I wanted to cry, to scream, my emotions were frozen in place. Right after starting elementary school, during spring break, Betty was involved in an accident on her way to class that robbed her of all the joys in life. She can't laugh, can't speak, can't walk, can't run. She's been in a vegetative state for 7 years now. Just lying there in that hospital bed, eyes and mouth barely open. But still, I never stopped believing that someday,
Mom,
Betty would open her eyes and say. However, at 14 years old, an even greater tragedy befell Betty. Somehow, she became pregnant. A 14-year-old child who can't move or communicate.
Who? Who could do something so cruel?
As I listened to the doctor's explanation, about to lose myself in rage, Odell, who had been trembling with clenched fists beside me, finally spoke.
We don't need a DNA test. I don't even want to know who did this.
He said it calmly but clearly, and stood up. Why would he say something like that? He took my hand and silently left the room, returning to Betty's hospital room. And there, he uttered the unbelievable. With a faint smile on his face. I'm Elena, 38 years old. It's just me, my husband Odell, and our daughter Betty. Odell is a year older than me. We started dating in college and got married about a year after graduation. There was a reason for our early marriage. I had quit my first job after only half a year. The long hours and interpersonal issues at work had taken their toll, leading to a mental breakdown. This initial stumble in my career cast a dark shadow over my future prospects. I was terrified to start job hunting again. Maybe I'm just not cut out for society. I might never be able to hold down a job again.
Elena, there's no way you're not fit for society. You managed to keep a part-time job all through college, didn't you? This company just wasn't the right fit for you, that's all.
Even when I started becoming a shut-in, he never stopped asking me out on dates. Back then, our dates often involved driving around or spending time in nature. I was touched by how considerate Odell was being. One day, while we were out on a drive to the beach, it happened.
If you're so scared of finding a job that you'd rather hole up at home, why not marry me instead?
I looked Odell in the eyes, taken aback by the sudden proposal, and the next moment I burst out laughing.
Stop it! Don't joke around like that out of the blue.
I could only hide my blushing face, equal parts embarrassed and elated, with laughter.
Would you be mad if I said I was serious? I've known since college that if I ever got married, it could only be to you, Elena. Rather than wasting away as a recluse, I think it wouldn't be so bad to get married and try changing your environment.
Odell's kindness brought tears to my eyes.
Take your time to think it over. I was planning to propose to you sooner or later anyway.
Even as I started to mentally stabilize, back then I was still too scared to leave the house. I knew I had to do something, but I hated feeling so helpless. In that darkness, Odell showed me a glimmer of hope. We registered our marriage and started living together soon after. Odell found us a place close to my parents' home. I'll protect you for the rest of our lives, Elena. My worried parents eventually accepted our marriage and started supporting us. I think Odell's sincerity and seriousness got through to them. His parents didn't object to our marriage either. My in-laws live in the countryside, over a 3-hour drive away, and they seem to assume Odell won't be moving back.
Don't worry about us. Just come visit every once in a while and we'll be happy.
My sister-in-law Rosetta had also gotten married a few years prior and was enjoying life as a couple. For an anxious person like me, I was grateful for this distance from my in-laws. Just as Odell said, married life drastically changed my circumstances. As I became a housewife and took on household chores, Odell thanked me every single day. Thanks for everything, as always.
Your cooking is so good, Elena. I can't help but eat too much.
Really?
There are seconds, so eat as much as you want.
I'm so lucky to be married to you, Elena. Even someone like me could be useful to Odell. Those small realizations, bit by bit, helped me regain my confidence. Then, something I never could have predicted happened. About half a year into our marriage, I found out I was pregnant. To me, pregnancy was nothing but terrifying. Could I really raise a child when I was still dealing with my anxieties about being a part of society? I decided to be honest with Odell about how I felt.
I'm thrilled that this child chose to come to us.
Odell's words made me realize something important. That's right, this baby chose me. I hadn't thought about it that way.
You know, I was born when my mom was 39, so when I was a kid, I always admired how young my parents were. I'm so happy that I get to be that kind of dad now.
It seems my in-laws had married late in life, as they were both in their 60s when we visited to inform them of our marriage. Young dad and mom. Seeing the joy on Odell's face, I gradually started to feel happy too.
You're right. This child chose to come to us. We should be celebrating.
I suddenly felt embarrassed about how I had been so anxious and self-absorbed. Odell was incredibly supportive throughout my pregnancy, and I felt truly blessed to have married him. Our baby was a girl. Our daughter, crying out heartily as she entered the world, was nothing short of our little angel. I will never forget the emotion I felt when I first held her. The weight of my tiny daughter in my arms was more than enough to make me realize the immense weight of this new life.
Thank you for being born to your mama and daddy. I promise I'll always protect you, no matter what.
I found myself naturally talking to my newborn girl. I think it was my vow as a mother. Our daughter, whom we named Betty, grew up healthy and strong. Even as Odell and I fumbled through the unfamiliar challenges of parenthood, every day was filled with laughter. Going for checkups, taking her to the park for the first time, visiting my in-laws. Raising Betty made me stronger. Then, when Betty turned 3, I started working the lunch shift at a nearby cafe. It had been 5 years since that crushing setback with my first job. I was finally free from that long period of suffering. That dreadful phone call came not long after Betty started elementary school, just as spring break was ending.
Please try to stay calm as you listen. Your daughter has been in a serious accident and is in critical condition.
I don't remember how I responded, but as soon as I hung up, I contacted Odell and rushed to the hospital where Betty had been taken. The pounding of my heart in my ears only intensified my anxiety.
Dear God! Please save Betty!
When we arrived at the hospital, Betty was in the middle of emergency surgery. Odell, who had gotten there after me, found me sitting on the floor with my head in my hands and pulled me into his arms.
It'll be okay. Betty is going to be just fine.
It sounded like he was trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to reassure me. For what felt like an eternity, all Odell and I could do was wait silently in that waiting room for Betty's surgery to end. Finally, the surgery in progress light went out and the doctor emerged. Betty had narrowly escaped death but remained unconscious, her condition still critical.
She's alive!
In that moment, that was all that mattered, and I thanked God for it. As Odell supported my sobbing frame.
Thank goodness. Oh, thank goodness.
He too repeated over and over. In that moment, I truly believed those words. According to the police, the man responsible for the accident was in his 20s and worked at a restaurant. He had been drinking there until the early morning. Driving while intoxicated, he sped right into a group of elementary school students on their way to class. In his hurry to get back home, he had taken a back street through a residential area. The man claimed he didn't know it was a school route at that hour. Luckily, the other children got away with just superficial injuries, but even that fact weighed heavily on my heart. Why? Why did this have to happen only to Betty? Faced with the painful reality before me, I couldn't help but let those words slip out. It had been several days since the surgery, and Betty still hadn't regained consciousness. Her vacant eyes stared up at the ceiling, just as they did every day. Betty was in a vegetative state. Still, we were grateful that she was alive. Though there were times when we couldn't help but cry, having Betty there with us was what mattered most. Good morning, Betty. It's so warm outside today.
Betty, listen. Mommy messed up at work.
I talked to her over and over again, every single day. I believed that somehow my voice was reaching her.
I'm home, Betty. I bought a new picture book to read with you.
Odell always stopped by the hospital on his way home from work, treasuring his time with her. Both Odell and I could feel the connection we had with Betty, even as she continued to stare at the ceiling.
See, Betty thinks this book is interesting too. Really? Then Mommy will read it to you tomorrow.
When the three of us were together, Betty's expression seemed to soften the most. We believed it wasn't just our imagination. A few months later, the perpetrator was found guilty and ordered to pay a large sum in damages. The figure had more digits than I had ever seen, but it wasn't equivalent to Betty's life. If that money could have brought her back to the way she was, we would have given it all up in a heartbeat. A year passed since the accident. Betty's classmates moved on to second grade. I think it was around this time that Odell started acting strange.
Sorry, I have to work late today, so I don't think I'll be able to stop by the hospital.
He had been visiting every single day, but then it became every other day, then every 2 days. Slowly but surely, Odell's visits to the hospital became less and less frequent.
Hey, can't you come see Betty for even just 10 minutes? She seems lonely in the evenings since you haven't been around.
I know. Work is just really busy. I'm sorry. Despite my repeated pleas, he was only showing up about 3 times a month now. And on the days he didn't visit, he would come home drunk every single night. Exhausted from visiting my parents, working part-time, and going to the hospital, I grew increasingly irritated with Odell's drinking. My stress just kept building. Then one day, a drunken Odell dropped a glass of water on the floor, shattering it. The moment that sound rang out, something inside me snapped too.
If this is what our life is going to be like, then just divorce me already.
Odell looked as if he had realized something.
I can't take any more heartache outside of what's happening with Betty. If you're not willing to work with me, then just file for divorce and leave right now.
As I spoke, tears streamed down my cheeks. I'm sorry. That's not it. It's not like that. It's just so painful when I think about Betty. Odell continued with a serious expression, as if he had sobered up completely. The thought that she might be like this forever, it feels like my heart is being ripped apart. I'm sorry. I was using alcohol to avoid dealing with it.
Why? Then how am I supposed to cope with this pain? If I run away, who's going to take care of her?
We were both utterly exhausted. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. That night, we held each other and cried. The year we spent waiting, hoping that Betty would regain consciousness someday, had a certain weight to it. It felt like a turning point. And that's exactly why there were moments when it seemed like there was no end in sight, and it became unbearable. I can't even imagine leaving you and Betty. I'm sorry. I'll be a better father and a better husband. I knew Odell was suffering too, and hearing him put it into words helped ease my anger a little. I felt like I could try believing in him one more time. I had no idea that a terrible betrayal from Odell was waiting for me just around the corner. For years after the accident, Betty turned 11. That year, Odell got a rare call from his parents' house. It seems my sis got divorced and moved back home. She lost custody of her son too. According to my mother-in-law Matilda, my sister-in-law Rosetta's embezzlement of the family's money had come to light, leading to the divorce. She lost custody and was being asked to pay child support and return the money she had taken. I've been asked to help take care of her until she can find a job. Is that okay? I guess it can't be helped if it's just until she finds work. But why would Rosetta embezzle money from her own family? Since we lived so far apart, I had only met Rosetta a few times. She seemed like a plain, unremarkable person, if anything. Apparently, she was trying to show off and kept treating her friends to expensive meals. It went on for years. She didn't seem like the type to do something like that. But with everything going on with Betty, we don't have much room to help out financially. Yeah. I'll do what I can within my salary. Don't worry, Elena. Okay. Actually, aside from my part-time wages, Odell managed all of our finances. When we first got married, I was mentally unstable and a housewife, and Odell was really on top of things like that. He took care of all the hospital paperwork and payments for Betty, so I trusted him completely. But around this time, Odell started skipping more and more of his hospital visits again. Betty. Daddy got promoted to assistant manager. I might have to cut back on my visits for a while, but I'm going to work hard for you and Mommy. One day, Odell came to the hospital after work and reported this while stroking Betty's hair.
What? That's amazing. Did you hear that, Betty? Your daddy is incredible.
Betty's eyes remained fixed on the ceiling as always, but her face seemed to be smiling.
Thanks. But I'll probably be getting home later from now on, and I think I'll have more business trips too. I'm sorry if it makes you two feel lonely.
Because Odell had taken the time to explain it to Betty as well, I didn't feel the same unease as before. The three of us as a family could keep going strong. Or so I thought. Around 2 years after Odell's work got really busy and he stopped coming to the hospital, I was approached by a hospital clerk.
You haven't paid this month's hospital fees yet, have you?
I thought about contacting Odell, but he was away on a business trip to New Orleans until the day after tomorrow. The hospital only accepted cash payments, so I decided to check our bank account and figure something out on my own for the time being. I quickly found the transaction records for Odell's and my accounts, but I couldn't locate the statement for the account where the compensation money was kept. After searching the whole house, I finally found that statement in a drawer of Odell's desk. I casually checked its contents and was stunned by the balance shown there. The compensation money, which had been such a large sum, was now less than half of what it was. Even considering Betty's high hospitalization costs, the rate at which it was decreasing was far too strange. I immediately called Odell.
Hey, you know that money we had for Betty? It's less than half of what it was. What in the world did you spend it on?
My heart was pounding rapidly. If this money ran out and we couldn't pay the hospital bills anymore, Odell's and my salaries alone wouldn't be enough to cover it. After a moment of silence, Odell finally spoke.
I told you before that I'd be sending money to my parents' place, right? And now that I'm an assistant manager, I have more social obligations that cost money. It can't be helped, can it? You're still sending money to your parents? Hasn't Rosetta found a job yet? And didn't you promise you'd send money from your own salary?
So for the past 2 years, Odell had been continuing to send money to his parents?
That money was paid up for Betty's sake. If it's gone, we won't be able to get by on just what we earn. Oh, shut up. There's still plenty left, it'll be fine. And it's not like we know how much longer Betty will even live anyway. What?
I was shocked by Odell's words. Did he think Betty wouldn't just wake up, but that she wouldn't survive? Seeing me go silent, he seemed to realize he had said too much and sounded flustered. My salary has gone up too, so don't worry, it'll be okay. Anyway, I have to get back to work, so I'll talk to you later. With that, he hung up. It was the moment when my doubts about Odell began to sprout. I left the house with the passbook and cash card in hand, paid the hospital fees, and headed to my parents' house. To protect Betty's money, I had decided to leave the card with my mother. When I told Odell about the card after he got back from his trip, his face turned bright red and he flew into a rage. He knocked over the furniture in the living room and swept everything off the shelves. I had never seen Odell so enraged before.
I need a distraction too, you know. For the past 7 years, thinking about Betty not recovering has made me feel like I'm falling apart. It's terrifying.
He screamed as he threw things on the floor left and right. He was like a child throwing a tantrum because he couldn't get his way.
What's so wrong with me spending money to take my mind off things? That money was supposed to include compensation for the family too, wasn't it? Is family just you? Have you ever considered my feelings? I've said this before, haven't I? When do I get to take a break? Stop only saying things that are convenient for you.
Without waiting for Odell's reply, I stated clearly.
I'll be managing Betty's money from now on. Got it?
Odell, who had been silently glaring at me with clenched fists, let out a breath as if the energy had drained out of him.
Oh, is that so? Fine then, I won't put a single cent into this house anymore. I'll send money to my parents and go out drinking with my cash. So don't you dare complain.
Leaving those words behind, he stormed out of the house. From that day on, Odell truly stopped coming home. Unable to make ends meet with just my part-time wages, I consulted my parents and decided to move back in with them.
It's okay. We'll support you and Betty.
That's right. You've been trying too hard on your own. It wasn't until I reached this age that I realized just how reassuring a parent's love could be. Are you going to clear out the house? If you're getting a divorce, I'll find a lawyer for you.
Thanks. But let me think about it a little more.
There was something suspicious about Odell. Still, I wanted to avoid Betty waking up to find the home she remembered gone. That's why, even though neither Odell nor I were going back, we kept paying the rent. I still believed that someday.
Mom,
Betty would open her eyes and say that Odell would go back to being Betty's kind, loving daddy. Nearly 7 years had passed since the accident. Betty turned 14. Even without consciousness, her body continued to grow. The small frame that had belonged to a first grader stretched out, slowly transforming from a little girl to a young woman.
Hey, Betty. If things had stayed the same, you'd be a middle school student in uniform by now. Would you have had your first crush? Or maybe you'd be going through a rebellious phase.
As I spoke to Betty, I suddenly found myself unable to stop the tears. It had been 6 months. Odell hasn't visited her even once. Where did the gentleman who adored his daughter go? I felt like I was being crushed by an overwhelming anxiety. It happened one day when I went to the hospital after finishing my part-time job. As I lifted the hem of Betty's pajamas to wipe her body like usual, I felt that something was off. Betty's lower abdomen seemed to be bulging. With the nutrition being delivered through a tube in her stomach, Betty's thinness was pronounced when her pajamas were lifted. Because she was so skinny, the bulge in her lower abdomen bothered me immensely.
She couldn't have gotten sick, could she?
Worried, I immediately called for a nurse. After I explained the situation, the nurse quickly fetched the attending physician, but the test results were beyond anything I could have imagined. I called Odell right away.
Please! Come to the hospital right now. Betty is...
What's wrong with Betty?
Betty is pregnant. There's a baby in her belly.
As I broke down in sobs, unable to hold back.
Got it. I'll be right there, just wait for me.
Odell gently said. When it came to Betty, Odell would still rush over after all. No matter what, he was still her father. Thinking that, I could feel my heart calming down a little. Waiting for Odell to arrive, we listened to what the attending physician had to say.
Is my daughter really pregnant?
Yes. Unfortunately, there is no mistake. The ultrasound image the doctor showed us clearly depicted what appeared to be a fetus.
Judging by the growth of the fetus, it seems the window for abortion has passed, but considering your daughter's condition, giving birth will be difficult. Abortion.
Yes.
However, even if we were to perform an abortion on your daughter, you would need to be prepared for considerable risks.
The attending physician delivered the news with a grave expression. I felt like everything had gone pitch black before my eyes.
Who? Who could do something so cruel?
Even covering my eyes with my hands, tears of anger and sorrow welled up.
My daughter can't move or express her will. There's no way she could have a child of her own volition. The hospital staff should know that better than anyone, shouldn't they?
The attending physician sealed his lips and fell silent. Unlike me, Odell's resolute attitude as he pressed the doctor made me feel reassured. I was truly glad to have him by my side.
The only explanation is that my daughter was raped. This happened inside the hospital, right? Don't you dare say it has nothing to do with you. How does the hospital intend to take responsibility for this?
I thought all I could do was cry, but the anger welled up at Odell's mention of rape and I stood up.
Why? Why does Betty have to go through something so horrible? I can't forgive the culprit. Do a DNA test or whatever it takes. Just find the perpetrator no matter what.
As I pleaded through my tears, Odell embraced me and slowly sat me back down in the chair.
Naturally, we will be reporting this to the police. Is that all right with you?
Of course.
I will report this to my superiors and we will handle the response going forward.
The attending physician spouted the usual words of apology, even as he seemed shaken. When the conversation ended, Odell's fists were trembling with rage as I sat there in a daze.
The hospital better show some sincere remorse. And,
glaring at the attending physician, Odell said something unexpected.
we don't need a DNA test. I don't even want to know who did it.
Quietly but clearly, Odell declared this and stood up. We left the doctor's office in silence and returned to Betty's hospital room. Even as I felt reassured by Odell's presence, I couldn't stop thinking about his final words. As soon as the hospital room door closed, Odell uttered something unbelievable. Looks like we'll be getting more money coming in now.
What?
You know, the compensation money from the accident was running low, right? Now you can rest easy with this, can't you? Odell had a faint smile playing on his lips. You're managing the passbook we have now, right? So this time, I'll manage the money that comes in from the hospital. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fair. I couldn't comprehend what Odell was saying.
What are you talking about? Did you not hear the explanation earlier? Betty could die. And you're bringing up money at a time like this?
It'll be fine. Betty's body has gotten bigger too. I'm sure she can handle the surgery. Odell hadn't even seen Betty's body in years. Surviving on the bare minimum nutrition, Betty had no physical strength left. Hadn't the attending physician said there was a 50-50 chance of our daughter surviving even with the abortion?
And what was that you said earlier? You don't care if they catch the culprit? After what Betty's been put through?
Odell's face contorted for a moment.
Of course I don't want to know. If I saw that bastard's face, I don't know what I'd do. I don't want to feel any more pain over this. I can't take it anymore.
He doesn't want to feel pain? He can't take it? Betty is the one actually going through it right now. Because he can't handle it, the victim, Betty, has to endure it? Unforgivable. Just as I was about to lash out at him, Odell's phone rang. Oh, hang on a sec. Odell whispered to me. It's from work. And left the room. I instinctively knew it was a woman. The moment he put the phone to his ear, I saw Odell's expression soften. I could hear Odell's voice talking in the hallway. Oh, it's fine. Yeah. Want to go on a trip sometime? Looks like some money will be coming in. Yeah. I'll come home early today. He was having an affair. I was certain of it. Was he spending the missing money on that woman? Or was he planning to from now on? If that was true, I couldn't forgive him. Sorry. Well, I better get back to work. Saying that, Odell left the hospital room without so much as a glance in Betty's direction. I also stepped out for a moment and immediately called my dad back home. On the day of the surgery, my parents rushed to the hospital. You can do it. And they cheered Betty on. Odell came too, but he barely exchanged words with my parents. Sitting there with his head hung low, Odell looked like he might be praying for the surgery to go well, or grieving, but I couldn't bring myself to believe in that image of him anymore. The day before, I had talked to Betty a lot. About how happy I was when she was born, how much I love her, how her smile always saved me, how grateful I was that she chose me to be born to. Betty, I'm so sorry for letting you go through so much pain. I promised to protect you, but I'm truly sorry. Mommy will never forgive the people who hurt you. The surgery went smoothly, but perhaps because her body couldn't handle it, Betty gradually weakened. Even after the surgery, Odell never came to check on her. He was running away. He couldn't face reality. That's probably what he'd say. In less than a month, with me and my parents watching over her, Betty took her last breath.
Why? Why did Betty have to go through this alone? If this was going to happen, it would have been better if she was never born.
Beside me, frozen in shock, my mom collapsed to the floor, screaming. Just as she said, what purpose did Betty have for coming into this world? For such a short life filled with so much suffering. Where is God in all this? Or is this supposed to be some kind of test from above? Even though I wanted to cry, to scream, my emotions were frozen in place. A few days after Betty's funeral, the investigation progressed using the DNA from the aborted fetus, and the culprit was arrested. It was a male nurse who worked at the hospital. I was so frustrated and furious. This was the only time I wailed and screamed at the top of my lungs. I wanted to tear him limb from limb with my own hands. Maybe it was because I felt so strongly that I needed to atone for not being able to protect her. After I had calmed down, I brought up divorce with Odell. We decided to have our final discussion in the house where the three of us had lived together. I thought he would agree readily, but he resisted.
No way! Why do we have to get divorced? Now that Betty's gone, we can finally go back to living a normal life.
I couldn't believe he could say something like that so easily. Let's start over as a family from square one. Betty left us that money thinking about our future. The compensation money is Betty's final gift to us.
What?
It seemed Odell had said something he shouldn't have. The little bit of affection I still had for Odell vanished in an instant. Using Betty's money to start over as a family? For those words to even come out of his mouth, it's the lowest of the low.
I know you've been having an affair. You're living with her now, aren't you? I have proof. What do you plan to do about her?
The day Odell had smirked and said, "Money will be coming in again," I had asked my dad to hire a detective to investigate him.
That's not it. That's just fooling around. It goes hand in hand with drinking. I was only doing it to distract myself from the unbearable pain. I'll break it off right away. It's not serious. For fooling around, it's been going on for 3 years. I had your finances looked into as well. Until I took away the passbook, Odell had been sending $2,000 to his parents' house. Rosetta still isn't working, is she? After everything Betty did for her, did you see how much money your parents sent? $300. $300.
Odell was flustered. He probably thought the details wouldn't be noticed since he was withdrawing in lump sums.
I got a call the other day. They said only $1,000 was transferred this month. That it wasn't enough to cover the child support for Rosetta's kid.
In addition to sending money to his parents, it seems Odell had also been covering the child support and the money Rosetta had been ordered to pay back.
I thought, they're family, so I have to help. Betty's money is the family's money too, so I figured a little bit would be okay.
I let out a deep sigh. He had even rented a room for his mistress. Now he's paying for her living expenses too.
What else could I do? She saved me. She supported me. She was my only escape. When I gave her money, she was happy and relied on me. It's because I had that I was able to face reality.
Odell's excuses infuriated me.
What? You weren't facing anything. You didn't visit Betty because you felt guilty, right? You were running away from her because you were scared to face her, weren't you? But I really did love Betty. That's absolutely not a lie.
I know that. Of course that's true. Maybe Odell's heart had already broken sometime during these 7 years. Maybe my heart is broken too. Even so, as her father, I wanted him to stay by her side until the very end.
You're weak and you're a coward. When things got tough, you ran away on your own, and now that she's gone, you think you can go back to your life before? No way, you coward. I will never forgive you.
I In front of Odell, who hung his head as he cried, I silently placed the divorce papers. And then I left the house where we had been paying rent all this time. Later, after getting a lawyer and talking with Odell again, the divorce was finalized. Odell agreed to deduct the compensation from the divorce trial and the money he had personally embezzled from the division of assets. Of course, I also made sure his mistress had to pay compensation. In the end, it seems Odell paid for his mistress's share as well. I believe my revenge against Odell was accomplished when our divorce was finalized. If Odell had truly faced reality and gone on to start a new life with his mistress, I was ready to forgive him for that. However, as expected, he turned a blind eye to reality. Driven by guilt towards me and Betty, he escaped into alcohol, and the woman apparently got fed up and left. Yes, I knew this would happen. With the money coming in, Odell quit his job and started drowning in booze from morning onward, but living like that, the money would quickly run out. Even so, unable to quit drinking, he eventually couldn't pay rent and had to move back in with his parents. Now he's hospitalized for alcohol addiction treatment, and Rosetta is working to support him. Matilda, my mother-in-law, who called asking for money, told me everything over the phone.
Please, send money for his treatment. You have plenty of money, don't you? You're the only one I have left to turn to.
I was appalled. Even after Betty's death, they were still counting on her money. Odell and Rosetta were probably quite alike in their indecisiveness and desire to please everyone. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but the moment they became unable to think of anyone but themselves, they had already gone astray. Weakness can become strength, but it can also become evil. Matilda, I don't have any money to use for him. He should have to pay for what he's done himself. I've put Betty's money to good use, and there's not a single dollar left. With that, I hung up the phone. After the divorce, I found a job and moved out of my parents' house. I deducted the compensation from Odell and his mistress, and donated all of Betty's remaining compensation to an organization that supports children orphaned by traffic accidents. Even now, I sometimes think about what Mom said in that hospital room. Would it have been better if Betty hadn't been born? I don't think I can say that for certain. That's something for Betty herself to decide, and no one but Betty has the right to declare that she was unhappy. I am so grateful to have met Betty. The time we spent together was irreplaceable, and it taught me so much. With Betty's lessons in my heart, I intend to keep living while acknowledging my own weakness and facing reality head-on.
Come see the baby with him. You must be frustrated being single.
With a triumphant smile, my best friend Christina said. It was the same expression she had 2 years ago. Christina and I, who were colleagues at the company, were thought to be best friends by those around us. In fact, I thought so too. But to Christina, I was just someone to be used. Christina stole Daniel, my fiancé, and left the company boasting about it. Left behind, I quietly thought to myself, I won't forgive Christina or Daniel, who abandoned me. The moment for revenge seems to have finally arrived. I narrowed my eyes and stared at Christina. My name is Kimberly, 27 years old. Having graduated from a decent university, I was able to get a job at a fairly large company. There, I fell in love with Daniel and got engaged after 1.5 years of dating. Daniel was older than me and was good at his job. He was popular among the women in the office, and I was filled with pride back then. But what was strongest wasn't a sense of superiority, but the happiness of being able to marry Daniel. My best friend Christina also congratulated me. At that time,
Congratulations on your engagement, Kimberly.
Thank you. I was so happy because I was crazy about Daniel. Daniel also smiled at Christina.
having friends to celebrate with. Kimberly, you have a talent for being likable.
Not at all. I shook my head, not entirely displeased. That day, the three of us, Daniel, Christina, and I, who had finished work, were at my apartment. Christina and I were sitting across from each other at the table, so I could see her expression well. Christina seemed genuinely happy for me.
How did Kimberly and Daniel end up together? I was the one who approached him. I even aggressively asked him out on dates. We went to various places for lunch and dinner together.
It's fun to be together, and Kimberly is good at cooking too. Daniel was youthful in appearance and had a toned body. That alone made him a fiancé to boast about.
Speaking of which, Kimberly, you suddenly started going to cooking classes.
Oh no, don't say that. I was flustered. Christina was innocent, so she probably didn't mean any harm. But for me, it felt like my secret had been exposed. As I panicked, Daniel laughed.
You went that far for me? I'm happy. Because I love Daniel.
I blushed and looked down. Overwhelmed by the awkwardness, I stood up from my chair and fled to the kitchen. I'll get some drinks.
Yeah, please do.
Daniel waved his hand at me. I retreated into the kitchen and sighed. I was surprised. Christina has moments like that from time to time. She would tell others inconvenient things about someone with a smile. It was my fault for letting my guard down around her. With that thought, I opened the fridge. At that moment, laughter echoed. It was Daniel and Christina's.
Really? Is that true? Yes, it is. Kimberly would bring her failed cooking attempts in a lunchbox to work every day. I tasted it once, and it was awful. But it was delicious when Daniel ate it, right?
Of course. The presentation was beautiful too.
You worked hard, Kimberly.
Christina laughed as if she was impressed. I hurried back to them with a beer in hand.
Christina, let's drop that topic, please.
We're engaged after all. I thought this conversation was already had. Christina said, her smile fading from her face. As she pouted like a child.
Look, Daniel, Kimberly is being tough on me.
Christina. Just kidding. Saying that, Christina smiled again. I felt uneasy about Christina's attitude, as she never apologized until the end. Daniel's demeanor gradually became more sullen.
I have a night shift today, so we can't meet,
he said, and stopped coming to my apartment. At first, I thought it was inevitable because of work. But one day, while talking to Daniel's colleague, I learned a shocking truth. Daniel seems busy these days, doesn't he?
Daniel? No, our department is slow right now, so there's no overtime. What?
I was stunned. When I confronted Daniel on his way home, he looked awkwardly down.
What's the meaning of lying?
Sorry.
Kimberly, wait.
Christina had been listening in from some point, and was standing there. She stood not by me, but by Daniel, and took his arm.
I was the one holding him back. I started going to cooking classes recently, inspired by Kimberly, and I had Daniel taste test and give me advice. Wait a minute.
I couldn't comprehend what Christina was saying. Fueled by anger, I glared at Christina.
Why are you copying me? And Daniel is my fiancé. It's strange to meet secretly, isn't it? There's nothing strange about it.
Christina suddenly twisted her mouth. It was a creepy smile. I didn't know Christina could make such a face.
It's not strange. If Kimberly had a chance, I think I have the right to try under the same conditions.
Christina snuggled up to Daniel and smiled.
He ended up liking me more than you. What?
I looked at Daniel in disbelief. What was Christina talking about? It was a bad joke.
Daniel, you're tired. You don't have to stick around Christina anymore.
Sorry, Kimberly. Daniel whispered an apology. Before I could say anything more, he hugged Christina.
Wait.
I've always liked Christina. But you were always there, honestly getting in the way. But since you was so devoted, I thought about marrying you instead.
What is that supposed to mean? Sorry, Kimberly. But that's how it is.
Christina said with a triumphant look while still in Daniel's embrace. Thanks for your hard work until now. From now on, I, who truly love Daniel, will support him. Wait. That's not. I felt darkness closing in around me. Despair crept up from my feet. They quickly left. The next day, Daniel broke off our engagement and announced his new engagement with Christina at work. 2 years have passed since then. The whispers about Daniel disappeared with his promotion. I've continued to work, bearing both sympathy and ridicule from my colleagues, until today. Until I met that person.
Huh? Isn't that Kimberly?
Christina. I heard a voice I didn't want to hear. Looking across the street, she was walking towards me. Why did I have to run into her on a weekend afternoon? She was draped in branded bags and accessories. Given Daniel's current position, such luxury wasn't impossible.
Kimberly, are you still living in that apartment? What do you want to know for?
Just wondering. I thought I might visit again. Or maybe you could come to my place. Hey, that would be better, wouldn't it? She was presumptuous. I frowned and was about to leave, when Christina called out from behind.
Come see the baby with him. You must be frustrated being single.
Christina. I sighed and stopped. When I turned around, Christina was smiling. The triumphant look on his face was the same as it was 2 years ago.
Fine. When should I come? The sooner, the better. How about tonight? You must be free, right?
I'm not free, but I'll come anyway.
Good.
Christina smiled, her face contorting as if in a grimace. That night, I drove according to the map I received. Daniel and Christina's house came into view. It was a grand and tasteless house, just like Christina. I'm here, Christina.
I've been waiting, Kimberly. How does it feel, the air of a married couple? It must be hard for single Kimberly, but bear with it.
Don't worry about me, I said, cutting off Christina's chatter.
Then, let me introduce my family.
Christina's face froze in astonishment.
Wait, isn't Kimberly single?
I might not be wearing a ring, but I do wish she'd wear one, though. Matthew, standing beside me, chimed in. Matthew is my husband. Though he's been divorced, he values our marriage all the more for it. Christina, what are you doing?
Oh, Daniel. Long time no see.
I casually waved and greeted him. Daniel was taken aback. First by my appearance, and then, a moment later, by Matthew's presence.
The president? What?
Hearing Daniel's voice, Christina also became flustered. Ignoring them both, Matthew laughed. Nice to meet you. I'm Matthew, Kimberly's husband. And this is our daughter, Brittany. Pleased to meet you. Brittany greeted them. She's turning 9 this year. Despite her age, she's composed and mature.
What do you think of my family, Christina? What do you mean, what? Why?
Christina screamed, her face turning red.
Why is Kimberly married to the president of the company?
Hearing Christina's outcry, I remembered the day I met Matthew in the company's break room. When I was feeling down and tired of the bad-mouthing alone, Matthew approached me.
What's wrong?
It's nothing. I looked up at Matthew with caution. Being tall, I had to look up to see his face. But that didn't matter to me at that time. I think I had reached a state where I expected nothing from anyone else. So, I didn't mind telling Matthew about Christina. After all, it was already well known within the company.
They're terrible.
Matthew frowned as he said that. It's my fault for not being appealing. That's what everyone says.
No, it's not your fault. The fault lies with those two.
It was the first time anyone had said that to me. So, I was happy and called Matthew my savior.
Savior?
Yes. You've made me feel so much better. So, Matthew, you're my savior. I said that and was about to leave. When Matthew, with a solemn look, spoke to me.
If I'm your savior, then let me be the one to rescue you.
That's how I started dating Matthew, and at the same time, the bad-mouthing about me faded away. I didn't understand why at the time. I only found out Matthew was the president after he proposed to me. No wonder the bad-mouthing stopped. After all, I was dating the president. Why didn't you tell me?
It was hard to bring up. But my desire to be with Kimberly is genuine.
Seeing Matthew smile sheepishly, I couldn't bring myself to say anything more. By that time, I had also gotten to know Brittany. Brittany had started calling me Mom. And so, I became Matthew's wife. Remembering that, I couldn't help but give a wry smile.
Who would have thought Matthew was the president? But now, I'm happy.
Yes, I'm sure you are. Christina's voice sounded like she was holding back anger. Well, you're the president's wife.
It's not about that. Matthew is kind and thoughtful, and Brittany is honest and adorable. I'm happy because I got to become a family with them. So, you came here to show off. That's in poor taste, Kimberly.
I was appalled by Daniel's misplaced remark. I didn't come here on my own. Christina was the one who insisted. You know she won't take no for an answer. I just went along with it.
Is that true, Christina? Well,
Christina's face looked like she was about to cry. To Christina and Daniel, who were feeling down, Matthew said cheerfully.
Promoting Daniel was a way of thanking him for being kind to Kimberly in the past. Yes. But that ends today. From now on, I'll be the one make her happy. Daniel, you're going back to being a regular employee. What?
Daniel let out a scream. Naturally. He must have bought a house based on his current income. But losing his position now would mean a significant drop in income.
You can't be serious,
Christina shouted.
Just because you're the president doesn't make this right. We have a baby to think about. You two both can work, that should be enough to get by.
I stated the obvious. Though, you might have to say goodbye to those branded goods.
Kimberly, you're the worst.
Christina was wailing. Daniel started to placate her as if he had resigned himself to his fate. I turned to Brittany with a smile.
Brittany, would you go back to the car? This isn't something I want you to see.
Okay. Brittany nodded and headed back to the car.
Shall we head back too?
Yes, let's. I started walking away with Matthew. Christina's crying could still be heard. The news about Daniel being demoted to a regular employee became a topic of gossip within the company.
It's not like Daniel was exceptionally talented. I want to place someone more competent in Daniel's position.
Matthew said this and then looked at me.
What do you think? Kimberly, would you like to give it a try? Me? No way.
Really?
But I believe you're diligent, and I trust you'll meet my expectations. Thank you, Matthew.
I wanted to meet Matthew's expectations, despite my apprehensions. So I accepted the position. My world changed overnight. Colleagues who used to badmouth me were now anxious to see how I'd react. Please take care of this.
All this work, by myself?
Daniel let out a cry at my instructions. But he got to work even before I could say anything more. Daniel was desperate to get promoted again, though Matthew said there was little hope for that.
Why has it come to this?
Focus on your work instead of complaining. Christina had also returned to work. Christina seemed to be financially cornered. The colleagues' response to her was cold. Everyone was aware of the friction between Daniel and me, and it was clear that I was the victor in this battle. There was no longer anyone in the company who dared to oppose me. One day, during a break, Christina approached me. Usually eating lunch alone, she spoke awkwardly. "Kimberly, please. Forgive us. We can't take it anymore. Daniel's salary has decreased, and we've had to give up our house and everything."
There's nothing to forgive.
I sighed in exasperation. Christina looked plain, almost like a different person. Though she wore makeup, it couldn't hide her pallor. Her hair was unkempt, showing a lack of care. This was Matthew's decision. I was promoted for my work, and Daniel returned to his original position. That's all there is to it.
But you have the title of being the president's wife.
Christina raised her voice. I shrugged in response. With Matthew's income, I don't need to work. But I continue because I find fulfillment in my job.
Don't act so high and mighty. Calm down, Christina.
I looked around. Christina followed my gaze. Other employees were watching us from a distance. She seemed to shrink, realizing that causing a scene would only worsen her situation. On another day, Daniel also approached me. He too pleaded for his position to be reinstated. Don't you think it's terrible to be given menial tasks by people who were once your subordinates? They seem to enjoy piling work on me.
That's tough.
I offered a sympathetic response, though it felt detached. I once had feelings for Daniel. We were engaged once. It was undeniable that some residual feelings stirred within me. But that was all there was to it. Now, I am Matthew's wife. I love him, and I think of Brittany as my own daughter. There was no love left for Daniel. Keep up the good work. You even have a child with Christina. Christina always cuts corners with meals. I feel sorry for the kid. I regret it. I should have married Kimberly instead.
If only you had what?
I looked at Daniel with a chilly gaze. I had thought he was a kind man. But in reality, he was just a coward, always looking out for himself. Caught up in convenient fantasies, utterly hopeless. I'm glad I didn't marry Daniel. Knowing his true nature now gives me peace of mind.
What?
I left a bewildered Daniel behind and returned to my work. I had my own struggles too. The workload was incomparable to before, and the pressure of not making mistakes was immense. Yet, I also felt a sense of fulfillment. I felt like I had finally found my place in the company. Christina and Daniel came to me almost in turns. Both of them became increasingly haggard, and it was distressing to watch.
Please! What happened 2 years ago was a mistake. Forgive us. Speak to the president. You know, convince him that it's a waste to keep me as a regular employee. I should aim for a higher position.
That's for Matthew to decide. I had stopped engaging with them. They both talked about nothing but money. And recently, it seemed their marriage was also on the rocks. I began to notice them arguing from time to time. Then, Daniel came out with something astonishing.
I'm willing to leave Christina. No, I will leave her. So, let's get back together.
Don't be ridiculous. My voice contained a hint of irritation.
I love Matthew and Brittany. It's over between us, Daniel. That can't be true. Don't you still think of me somewhere deep in your heart?
He was again saying things that suited him best. I had no words to return. It seemed pointless to speak. Then Christina appeared. She must have been eavesdropping on our conversation, and confronted Daniel with a raised voice.
What are you saying, Daniel? Christina doesn't even take care of the child properly and does nothing but complain every day. I didn't know she was like that.
The two of them started arguing. I quietly left the scene. Soon after, it seemed they got divorced. I say seemed because they're no longer at this company, so I only know through rumors.
There's no hope for promotion here anymore. I'm sick of my colleagues.
With those bitter words, Daniel left the company. Christina also left around the same time. Later, she appeared several times in front of the company, begging me to lend her money, but I didn't entertain her requests.
Christina, you need to manage on your own. Don't be like that. As the president's wife, you must have more money than you need. Don't talk like that.
I frowned. Matthew's assets exist as a result of his hard work. It's unfair to talk as if the money just appeared out of nowhere. But it seemed my words didn't reach Christina.
You're heartless. You're no best friend of mine.
That was the last line I heard from Christina the last time we met. I couldn't help but scoff. Best friends. The feeling was mutual.
The moment you took Daniel from me, we ceased to be best friends. Maybe we were never truly friends to begin with.
I muttered to myself, alone. I continued to work at the company. However, after finding out I was pregnant, Matthew and I decided that I would leave the company. Financially, we had no worries. I could also ensure more time with Brittany.
Let's spend lots of time talking together, Brittany. Yeah. I'm also excited about the baby.
Brittany smiled as she gently touched my growing belly. Matthew watched us with a fond smile. Brittany has a little brother. His name is Andrew.
Andrew.
She adored and took great care of Andrew. Despite her maturity, Brittany had felt lonely with both parents working. She became more affectionate towards me, and I grew even fonder of her.
Mom, Andrew smiled. Do you think he knows I'm his big sister?
He might. I stroked Brittany's head, who was beaming with pride. Matthew, busy with work, often came home late. Concerned about the limited time to talk with the kids.
How about we go out this weekend?
Where to?
Anywhere is fine. Whether it's a barbecue or an amusement park. If our time to talk with Brittany is limited, we should make our time together as rich as possible.
I said. Matthew's eyes lit up as he took my hand.
Kimberly, you're a genius.
Not really. But more importantly, shall we go check on the kids sleeping? With my suggestion, Matthew nodded. Hand in hand, we headed to the children's room. Brittany was sleeping. She was wrapped in her bed, breathing peacefully in her sleep. She's grown so much. He murmured, touching Brittany's cheek gently. She smiled as if tickled, but showed no signs of waking. Surely, she would have sweet dreams tonight. We then moved to our bedroom. In the crib beside us, Andrew was sleeping. His hair was starting to grow in, and his features resembled Matthew's more than mine. Yet, Matthew said,
Andrew looks like you,
he said with a smile.
But he has your mouth, Matthew, don't you think?
Really? I think the area around his eyes is just like Kimberly's. We exchanged these gentle words and laughed together. Life had its hardships and unpleasant moments, but I was undeniably happy now.